They try to Islamicize it. They sprinkle some ayat and some ahadith.
You will be accountable.
Yes.
Not for what your neighbor did or what other people. You will be accountable for what you are doing.
Within the scholarship, you have a massive diversity of opinions. So that even within the Salaf, you have this idea of political differences that come about.
In areas in America, it's like Ash'ari gangbanging. It doesn't say there will be 50 women for every one male. It's 50 women for every one real stand-up man. If the Qawm saw these people today, they probably would say, Ajib. You could be sincere and be sincerely wrong.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and welcome back to Karima podcast with myself, Asim, and Maulana Asim as well. Today we have a very special guest, Shaykh Dawud Walid. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing fabulous. How are you brothers doing?
Alhamdulillah, we are very well, thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
So, for those of you who don't know, Shaykh Walid has a number of books actually, and again, very, very pertinent at this sort of time, in this sort of political strife and struggle that we're having globally. He has a book on sacred activism, which we're hoping really to talk about. And you've had a book recently around the centering of the Black narrative, and sort of Black Muslims within the early Muslim, sort of within Sahaba and within that early group. And also you are an executive member of the Council for American and Islamic Relations as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm the
in Michigan.
Director of the Michigan, the Michigan office.
Right. Mm-hmm. So again, someone I think that will be certainly, I think your views will be incredibly important around this issue about activism, this issue about protesting, and all of those kind of things, which we're really hoping to get into. One of the other things that Shaykh Walid is very well known for is actually his interest and information around Futuwwa, which is again something that the Karima Foundation have been very heavily involved in for the last few years, and again hopefully something that we'll be touching upon with Shaykh Walid, inshallah. So just to start off very quickly, and to get right into it, what is sacred activism? We are finding more and more that Muslims are, in particular with the current Black Lives Matters movement, and in particular around challenges, the death of George Floyd, we have lots and lots of people that are taken to the streets. We actually have a march or a protest that's happening right now in High Wycombe around this particular issue. So how should Muslims be approaching this, and what is sacred activism?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Fatih lima ughliqa wa khatim lima sabaqa nasib al-haq bil-haq wa hadi ila siratika mustaqim wa ala alihi haqqan qadrim al-azim wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. Well, when we're talking about this issue of sacred activism, activism really isn't the problem or the issue at hand. The issue is what type of activism. So the adjective sacred is what really needs to be honed on in, so that we could then approach activism the best way, in which from an Islamic perspective, from our usul, I believe that the basis of activism in Islam, according to the Islamic paradigm, would be under the construct of al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, which is the enjoying the good and forbidding the evil, which is a community obligation, fardun kifaya, and in many cases it can also be fardun ayn, depending on the circumstances. So sacred, and we have the term harma in the Arabic language for sacred, and we have the hadith about this, that the believer in his or her sanctity is more precious than the Kaaba. right? And we are told this by our beloved Prophet alayhi wasallam. But when we're talking about hurma or sacredness, that the sacredness of a matter relates to, first, who is the definer of the sacred and who's the one who sets the boundaries of the sacred. And that would be Allah, right? It's not, that which is sacred is not simply left up to the opposite, which is the profane, meaning that it is not up to democratic vote about what deserves sanctity and what doesn't. It comes from Allah Azza wa Jal. This is number one. And when we look at this even word harma, we have the word haram that relates to harma, right? And al-Masjid al-Haram is the most sacred masjid in which the Kaaba is in its precincts. But the haram is an area where there's certain precincts or certain parameters where there's supposed to be a heightened consciousness of certain things that should be done and certain things that should be absolutely refrained from. So when we're talking about this, if we're looking at the parameters of activism as like a haram that has hurma, then that we know that there's two things. Number one, that the objective has to be based in the sacred. And actually, for those who are the people of Ihsan, everything that we do, the objective is actually Allah. Allah is the objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the dua that says, Ilahi anta maqsudi wa ridaka matlubi, right? That my God, like you are my desire, you are my objective, and is your felicity and is your pleasure that which I am seeking, right? So if we look at it from that paradigm, how we look at the activism or the end goal, number one has to be based in the sacred, but not only should the parameters of that be based in the sacred, which is, of course, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Ijma' of what the learned Muslims have always agreed upon, right? As that which is good and recommended, as well as that which is blameworthy and forbidden, that also the means have to be respective of the sacred too, because we aren't a people that says the ends justify the means, right? So just because there's a noble objective, and we'll use this as an example real quick without going too long, but we know that all life is sacred, right? Allah Azza wa Jal made all life sacred, be it a Muslim or a non-Muslim. And killing anyone or murdering people, especially because of their skin color, we know that's heinous. So standing against that, that would be a noble cause to be against that murder. However, we just can't say that the ends justify the means, not as Muslims. So there's a certain way that we would go about meeting the objective. And there's also certain types of adab that would have to be adhered to. And basically, adab from our perspective is to give everyone and everything its proper due and its proper right at its proper place and time. And this would be according to how Rasulullah Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam, how he told us how to do it and how he demonstrated in his beautiful example.
And I think at the moment, in particular, I mean, again, I think there are definitely some challenge or some differences between the situation in America and the situation in the UK. But we do tend to find there are a lot of people. I mean, one of the examples I gave previously actually was there was a very, very rousing speech from a lady in Minnesota talking about the looting, effectively saying, you know, you're the looters. You guys taught us looting. You know, you were the ones that stole from us. You stole from the, you know, the Native Americans. You stole, you looted. And now we're just doing that. We're doing what you taught us. And I think it was like, and again, I think that one of the other things I really wanted to get into actually was about feelings and emotions, because these are really, really emotive topics. And they bring out lots of feelings. And I think lots and lots of people shared that. again, initially like, oh my God, wow, she's absolutely right. You know, we know about the colonial past and all of those kind of things. But then you kind of take a step back and you know, actually, are they really our teachers as Muslims? And again, the example that I gave in the previous podcast was Umar Mukhtar. You know, when when they managed to capture some Italian forces, and they said, you know, and then the people wanted, you know, to do whatever they wanted to do with them because of the anger and the frustration. And the Shaykh said, no, these are not our teachers. You know, this is just because they would have done it, that doesn't mean that we're going to do it.
Right. So the hadith is not authentic, but the meaning is good. It's a hadith narrated by Imam al-Tirmidhi in his Sunan, rahmatullahi alayhi. And the hadith says, do not be like people who are mindless, that when people do good to you, you do good to them. But when they do bad to you, you do bad to them. No, accustom yourselves that when people do good to you, you do good to them. But when they do bad to you, you don't do bad to them. And this relates back to what as has been depicted by Shaheed Umar Mukhtar, rahmatullahi alayhi, that when he was talking to his people about what the white supremacist Italian fascists were doing to the Libyan people and how they were killing them. And then some of those people were captured, and his ashab were like, they wanted to do similar to the Italians, what the Italians did to them. And then Umar al-Mukhtar rahmatullahi said, they are not our teachers, right? And we see that in the Quran and Sunnah, there's a basis behind Umar al-Mukhtar, what he said. So we can't use this rationale, you know, and this goes back to having proper sanad of Muslims need to be connected to teachers who learn from proper teachers, who learn from proper teachers, who learn from proper teachers. Because without that, Muslims will start coming up with weird ideas themselves. I'll give you an example. There's a young sister I know who contacted me, and I was, alhamdulillah, I gave her advice, but she said, well, you know, she said, Ibrahim alayhi salam broke the idols. The Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam broke the idols at the Kaaba. And he said, so capitalism is a modern day idol. So she was using it to try to justify people breaking out windows at the Target Minneapolis and burning down businesses, because she says capitalism is the modern day idol, right? So then therefore, if those idols were destroyed by the prophets, then we should be, there's no problem with destroying these like modern day symbols of idolatry. And I'm like, no, sister, that number one, that's not the same, that's not analogous. Then number two, we're talking about people's property. And the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam said in his farewell sermon that your bloods, your property, and your honor are all sacred. And Hizbul Mal is one of the maqasid of our Sharia. We just can't go around and because we have a disagreement with state violence, that corporations or private businesses, because we've even had Muslims who had some of their businesses burned down in Minneapolis, that gives us the right to think that we can go and burn their businesses down and take their products, right? So that's one angle. The other angle, though, I would say is that the people who are on the streets protesting, and even some who have taken things, I want to give an alternative. I want to give two points of view regarding this looting situation, right? Because even when we talk about things from judgments from a qadi to even the secular criminal justice system in America, that we do look at occasions and also the motives of why people do things, because the motive of why someone does things, does something, would determine how the person is charged and what type of potential punishment or lack thereof they would get, right? So there are some people who are looters who are opportunists. Many of these people don't even come from poor backgrounds. As a matter of fact, a lot of this looting and burning down businesses are actually people who come from the privileged class. Many of them are white Americans. These aren't people in poverty, right? There are some African Americans involved in there too, doing certain things and certain looting. However, there's another group of people. There's a group of people who are already in poverty, number one. People who lost their jobs because of COVID-19. And then President Donald Trump and the government has it like up to a quarter of the people haven't gotten any sort of unemployment checks or relief, right? So it's a difference between some so-called woke activists going in to burn things and loot things and people going into a Target store or a grocery store to steal food because they're in abject poverty and they're looking at as a means of getting some food, right? So these two groups aren't the same. And we even have something in Islamic history, by the way, that we judge things differently based upon circumstances and people in abject poverty. This isn't exactly the same, but I just want to mention this. During the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, there was an issue in an area under the Khilafah in which famine spread. And people started to loot and people were stealing food or stealing things, right? Umar actually suspended the had for stealing at that time, because we know what the had is for stealing, right? Someone steals a certain amount, that there's a had of getting part of their hand chopped off, right? I know, and that might make some post-modernist reformist Muslims feel a little uncomfortable that that punishment in the sacred law. But Omar suspended that. Why did he suspend that? Because he knew that people were desperate. So there are opportunists in some of these cities who are looting. There are also some very desperate people. So we can't conflate and say that both of these people are the same, right? It doesn't mean that we encourage or we should belittle looting, but at the same time, all these people aren't the same. So we can't lump all of the people who are doing it as they're just miscreant opportunists who are like leftists, who are like woke anti-capitalists. They're not all the same. There's some legitimately struggling people who are desperate, and they saw this as an opportunity to get something for themselves and for their families when they're not living well.
Shaykh, you spoke about obviously Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, and you mentioned Mukhtar's come up, and we have in our tradition and the Sufi tradition, at the very least, you have this idea of how would you put it, sort of activism that's very physical. That there were people that stood up at certain points, and like Mukhtar rahimahullah ta'ala, people like the Mahdi in the Sudan, people like Imam Shamil in the Caucasus, and there's been consistent, especially in the recent colonial period.
Abu Hassan al-Shadhili.
Oh, Abu Hassan, I didn't know. Subhanallah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you go even back, like Abdullah bin Mubarak and the early, what we would claim, other Sufis, other people may dispute that, but at the very least, that's the roots from which our Sufi tradition, from the very least, comes from. So this idea you have of people who did stand up and who were physically ready to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar and stand up to the powers that be. And I think the statue thing's gone, because at the same time you have people quoting verses. So some people quote the verse, وَلَا تَسُبُّ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ, don't swear at the gods of people because they'll curse Allah. And then Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, uffil lakuma, that uff to you and your idols and those things that you worship. So and then I went back to Imam Ghazali and his Kitab Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, and he lays out, and then he has a section where he goes, when it comes to it, there's a point where you have to, the yad has to be used. So like, how do we, as Muslims, how do we understand that sort of moment where there has to be a physical presence, where we do have to step up and do something, and what are the conditions and stuff that we need to bear in mind while we're doing all of that?
Okay, well, I think that one instructive hadith that we all know, that was narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radhiyallahu anh, is narrated in Sahih Muslim. We all know this one, that if you see a munkar, that you change it biyadi. right? You change it with your hand. And if you can't do that, then resist it bilisani, meaning you speak out against it. And then if you can't do that, then resist it biqalbihi wa dhalika adaful iman, right? You resist it in your heart, but that's the weakest of faith. So many of the scholars from many of the scholars of old, from the Habaib, as well as even going back to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that they understood biyadi as those people who have the authority to change it, right? So those people who have political authority, they have the means. So it was never understood classically in our tradition that the first step was that the awam, or just people, just go to the streets and they think they can change things on their own. It should be those people who have the authority and have the capacity, right? Then those who speak out against it relates to primarily and firstly al ulama wa du'at, right? Is that the scholars are the ones who are the inheritors of the prophets, al ulama warathatul anbiya, that the scholars and the preachers are the ones that are supposed to speak out about the issue. And in this, they give guidance to the people about how to address the issue. And I think that's been part of the problem that we've had in the West in general, that many people who are shuyukh, who are min ahl tasawwuf, haven't taken the lead on giving clarification about some of these socio-political matters, and just told people, stay in your homes and stick to your wir. Well, this is a time where the people need guidance about how to look at these things and deal with these injustices, right? It's not just sit in your house and do dhikr, right? There has to be something more than that, especially when we live in societies when we can openly speak out against wrongdoing. It's not like in some Muslim countries that if you even say the slightest thing that could be somewhat political, that the Shaykh or the Da'iyah is in prison. If he talks about during the khutbah for Salatul Jummah, khutbatul Jummah, he's arrested before Maghrib time. And we know this is a reality in many of the lands of the Muslims, especially in the Arab world, right? So the scholars are the ones who have to first put forth and take the lead in the du'at in this regard. Now, I would suggest, who wrote about this very fabulously, in my opinion, is Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, rahmatullahi alayhi. Ibn Qudama actually was a direct student of Sayyid Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi. And he wrote and gave a series of steps of escalation of al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. See, you don't go to what some would call in America the nuclear option right from the very beginning, right? You don't go and try to physically topple things, right? There's steps, right? So there is
Levels.
first trying to discuss things and having people who can have access to discuss things privately with political leaders, those who have access. Then there's also the telling people what is good and what is evil, even when it's proclaimed publicly, but it's done birifq walin, right? And this is like part of the prerequisites. It has to be done with a mild tone and tenderness. And this is the path. These are the first step that when Allah Azza wa Jal told Musa wa Harun alayhi wasallam to go to Fir'aun, and Fir'aun's the worst tyrant mentioned in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal said, فَقُلُ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ لَيَتَذَكَّرُ وَيَخْشَىٰ. Right, Fir'aun's the worst of the worst, but Musa, Harun, peace be upon them, said, go to Fir'aun and you speak to him, but in a mild tone, right? You don't say, yeah, kelb, yeah, ahmaq, or all these things, right? Or show them how enraged you are. I gotta speak this truth to power and be so angry, or cuss them out, or whatever. Like, that's not how that's not the engagement, right? But there's a subtle escalation, but then it comes to the point that sometimes begin to be too much, and then there has to be some sort of public demonstration. And I will just give you just a very small example about this happening in the Muslim world. At Dawud Walid, and when I say Alawiya, I don't mean the Alawi Surah in Lebanon, in Syria. Dawud Alawiya was the government that reestablished itself in the Maghrib, in Morocco, right? And this is the government that began and ruled in Morocco after the era of the Spanish Inquisition, and the Muslims began to come back into Morocco, and these are descendants of Moulaya Idris El Hassani, who's one of the spiritual masters, and he's really the spiritual father of the Moroccan people, actually. There was a sultan who was Alawi named Ismail ibn al-Sharif, and he did something where he took Muslims who were free, who were black, and he made them slaves. And he made them swear upon Sahih al-Bukhari that they would serve him. And they're known as Jaysh Abid al-Bukhari, if you read in Islamic history. So it was he didn't do this to the Arabs nor to the Amazighi people. He took free black people, took them from their homes, and enslaved men and women to make them serve him in his government, right? Which is, of course, this is un-Islamic, and the Maliki school of thought is very explicit about this, right? Some of the ulama protested, they wrote to him and said, this is un-Islamic, right, in Fez. Then they actually did a protest, and then the governor of this area, on behalf of the Sultan, because the Sultan was based in Meknesa, he sent his Sultan in the Fez, and he captured the chief faqih of Fez who spoke out about this and led this protest, and he executed the faqih, Shahid. He executed him just for speaking out against this anti-black, un-Islamic slavery of enslaving his own Muslim brothers and forcing them. And then some of the people then fled, including some of the black people who escaped. They fled to Jabal A'lam. This is the place of the maqam of Sidi Abdul Salam ibn Mashish, right? And we also forget that Ibn Mashish himself was Shaheed. He was martyred. He was killed, right? So Ibn Mashish wasn't like some just some quiet, like apolitical guy. Abu Hassan al-Shadhili left. He had his dream, went to Egypt, and when the Crusaders come, he left his zawiya and picked up his sword. Right. So these great Sufi masters, they weren't these like apolitical pussycats who just sat back in their homes and did dhikr alone. When it was time to say this is wrong, this is zulm, they openly spoke out against it, because this is the duty that the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam laid, that if you don't have the authority to change it with your hands, then you have to speak out against it.
On that note, like I think we had a bit of a discussion about the authority of scholarship, especially we had this, the mosques and the COVID, and the scholars saying keep the mosques open, and suddenly, and many of our senior scholars, like names like Shaykh Mufti Taqi Uthmani, big names, big scholars from all over the world said, keep the masjids open, this is our prerogative. And a lot of the youth at that point get really emotional and emotive, and they're like, these scholars, they're so out of touch, they don't understand reality, and then there's a massive crisis of religious authority where they're like, okay, we can't trust the scholars anymore. Like, we don't want to take what they say. And you mentioned, because we have many people in our tradition who did stand up, who did do so many things, like Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa, I'm reading about him recently, who stood up to authority, was killed, poisoned by Ibn Hubayra eventually. But at the same time, I mean, the scholars, it seems like they have a lot of trepidation, because they see a movement that, for them at the very least, seems to be rooted in something that is wholly un-Islamic. And they feel uncomfortable attributing themselves to that they don't want. And then at the same time, because you see a lot Allah Alam, whether du'at and students of knowledge, whatever you want to call them, who are ready to jump on any bandwagon that happens at any time, who are just like, everybody's saying this, and we got to Islamize the discourse, and we got to say the same thing, and we'll find verses that will justify everything. So isn't there some sort of understandability that, because I saw with Imam Zayd, for example, when he came out, he was like, I can't stop people from protesting, but for him it seemed like he was saying, we've got to mitigate it as much as possible. If it's going to happen, we have to control it as the ulama. So what is the ulama's position now, and who should people look to for guidance on this specific issue from the ulama?
Right. So I say this, that when the scholars don't speak up on issues and give clarity, they leave a void. Right. So it's to criticize people who go out on the streets and take these positions when the scholars haven't taken the proactive steps or haven't openly stood up and spoken about these issues and give people the proper alternative of how to act, then I don't blame the Muslim teenager who sees Zoom and they see these clear injustices, especially if they're Black and lived in a place like America for all of these years, and they know this happened to their father and this happened to their grandfather. I don't blame these Muslims for going out in the streets. I think it's more of the duty for the scholars to speak up and try to give clarity, right? And this is the value. And by the way, a number of different mashayikh and ulama, we've been meeting quietly and discussing these things about strategies, about how to clarify some of these issues. Like I just wrote something, it should be coming out soon, but I wrote something clarifying this issue about Black Lives Matter, right? And I've referred back to my teachers, and it draws off of much of what I wrote in the book Towards Sacred Activism. So I make the delineation between the slogan and how it started, the people who are protesting, who don't even know about the agenda behind the movement, but the actual organization, how it was funded, what is its agenda, and how some of the things that it does is completely un-Islamic, right? But again, the scholars and the people who've gotten permission to speak on these things from their teachers have to clarify things, because if they don't clarify and give tabayyin, if the ulama don't clarify the matters, then really the blame is not on the army. Really, it's not, right? Because it's more of the issue that the scholars have to give the guidance. At least that's the way that I view it. Now, unfortunately, we do have the issue of some popular speakers and some du'at who take really secular positions or frameworks. I can even say some of it's Marxist, and then they try to Islamicize it. They sprinkle some ayat and some ahadith. But I would say this is also how we have to actually point out, and I know this may seem contentious and maybe a little sectarian, but we also have to point people towards the scholars and the voices that have received authentic chains of transmission of knowledge, right? Because just because someone's popular and they have 1 million people on Facebook and they have Shaykh in front of their name, or they're called Ustadha, that doesn't mean that they have a proper transmission of knowledge that they've gotten, or a methodology, right? They don't have a proper epistemology or usul about how they even approach knowledge to begin with.
Framework.
Right? Yeah, framework. Yeah.
But I think in the British context, I think this is the challenge that we have. And again, I don't mean to sort of dump on any scholars in the UK or what have you, but that's what happens, is that if they're not actually out there speaking about these particular issues. Now, I mean, I'm not even just talking about this particular issue, because this is now at the fore, but there's loads of other issues, lots and lots of other problems and challenges. But if they're not there in the forefront, there will be someone else who, like you said, doesn't have that tradition or that knowledge or that chain of tradition. But then because they're eloquent, because they're charismatic, because and again, they, you know, all they need sometimes is just the garb. You know, you can just have that outer, whatever it is. You can have the beard and the hijab, and that's it. You like you said, that you can sprinkle a few bits and pieces on, but they then take up that vacuum, and then people will look towards them. Young people do look towards them, and then what they will say, well, this person here is the person that's speaking out against the oppressors, and the zulm that's been, you know, perpetrated across the world. These are the people that we now need to follow, because our teachers, our scholars, have kind of let us down. And so that's really intricate. And again, and I think some of the popular American activists, I suppose, they then just get a lot of attention across the world, and again in the UK.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
there?
forgive us over here in America, but we didn't do a good job at managing this at first, really. There's been a movement to change this, but unfortunately, a number of activists and politicians, and to be frank, women that are propped up by people outside of the community who help fund them and give them platforms, have introduced a lot of confusion into the community, and not just in America, but in Canada, in the UK. So please forgive your brothers over here in America for not handling this better. But it's a real problem where you have Muslim activists who are on the streets right now, or even politicians who at one point who are supposed to be quote unquote woke, who then openly talk about we need to, under intersectionality, we're supposed to work and help promote the sexual confusion agenda. Muslim politicians dancing with pride flags. One of them was with a sign saying, "Marry the right person." And marry the right person, by the way, in America, that means marry someone of the same gender. It doesn't mean heterosexual marriage, right? So please, please.
There's no need to ask for that. But I was going to say, but then this then goes back to that, you know, the really important bits that you mentioned in your book about actually it's got to be absolutely grounded. So whatever activism has to be absolutely grounded in the sacred, because that's what. And again, you know, we mentioned earlier that we spoke to Dr. Abdullah, but then that's something that he impressed very, very firmly, was that you will be accountable.
Yes.
Not for what your neighbor did or what other people. You will be accountable for what you are doing. And it's very easy for people to just, and again, it's incredibly confusing, right? It's just, there's just an incredible amount of confusion, and people are then just needing to turn towards some kind of leadership.
Can I say something here? You know, one of the things I wanted to say, because I wanted to get to this, is within the scholarship, you have a massive diversity of opinions and political opinions, and that's been a very strong aspect of our tradition since the early period. I was reading about Imam al-Awza'i. When he heard that Imam Abu Hanifa said it was permissible to rebel against the Abbasids, he said, you know, ihtamalna kulla shay min Abi Hanifa. We literally took everything Abu Hanifa said, we bore it until we heard he said you could go out and rebel against the ruler. So that even within the Salaf, you had this idea of political differences that come about. And sometimes even not like political differences, some ulama will come out and they will take certain positions that are grounded in their understanding of the deen. And potentially, and I do want to get your thoughts on this point and the added points, what's the scope for ijtihad from the get-go? Like, how much should people be willing to accept from their scholars in terms of difference of opinion on various issues? And then at the same time, what happens is when the scholar doesn't take your political stance, and because you already come with your mind made up, you're like, okay, he's cancelled. We disregard everything he says. His position is null and void, and that's the ulama failing again. But that's not, like, how much of it is the ulama's fault, which is what I'm trying to say. And at the same time, how much can you actually affect the general public, or is there a subset of the general public that the ulama should be focusing on rather than trying to be way too generalizing themselves?
Okay, so the ulama have to model this, right? So this is in two ways. First, in person, and then also and teaching, right? So one of the things too is that it has to be modeled that ulama who come from some different manahij and have some differences, that they still keep good relations and that they do programming or at least seen talking with each other and communicating with each other. Because unfortunately, what has developed in America, including in the scene of tasawwuf, by the way, and I've spoken about this before publicly several times, that we've almost taken on like a gang type of mentality. So in American major cities, we have like Bloods, Crips. Then in some cities, you have like gangster disciples and vice lords and Latin kings. And it's like sometimes people take their murshid or their sheikh like it's a gang leader, and then their tariqah is like a gang. Like this takes place, I don't know about the UK, but in areas in America, it's like Ash'ari gang banging, right? In tariqah. And it's sad, right? Where when people from different turuq beef with each other and dismiss, it's really sad. Much less the people who are tariqah affiliated with the Salafis. That's a whole nother like discussion, right? So this behavior has to be modeled amongst mashayikh, I believe. And the second thing is, we know that in these days and times that we live in polarizing times, and anyone with an opinion can become Sheikh bin Google or Ustadh bin Facebook, which means that there has to be some consistent, not only writing, but talking about the adab of ikhtilaf, like what constitutes legitimate ikhtilaf according to our tradition. As you mentioned, Imam Awza'i and how he differed with not only Abu Hanifa, but even Imam Malik supported the khuruj of Anas az-Zakiyya against Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, right? So like two of the Imams of Ahlul Sunnah explicitly supported uprisings against political authority. But there were others that were different, right? But then what is the adab about this? I think one good example is, and I've highlighted this, actually I did something for Safina Society that's coming out soon, where I talked about this issue of the adab of ikhtilaf and how Al-Layth ibn Sa'ad disagreed with Imam Malik. But the language that they use and the deference that they used with their brother in Islam, even though they strongly disagreed, but it wasn't anything about canceling. I mean, far from that. It's almost like I love you and I respect you, and like it almost hurts me to disagree with you, right? Like, so it's coming from a different place.
I don't
Have we
know.
lost that place though? Sorry
No,
to jump
but
back.
I think
Have we lost that place? I mean, just first of all, to say that I didn't think I'd hear the phrase Ashri gangbangers ever, but that's interesting.
Maybe that's an American thing. It's an American thing.
No, we got people here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we wouldn't equate them to. I've definitely heard people equate them to cults and cultish sort of this whole like, you know, my sheikh this, and then so we say this, and so we're going to do this, and then so it does become a problem. And I do think that is a problem in the UK.
My sheikh is the Gauth or the Qutb of the time. So then, you know, once you invoke that, then everything else that if you disagree, then you're at war with the Wali of Allah if you disagree with what I say about my sheikh. That happens here too, unfortunately.
I think we could even link onto the Futuwwa thing coming on this point, because it's the idea of, you know, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of impulsive decision making that's happening now. People see images, there's a heightened sensitivity at the moment. You see something and people are in lockdown, they're stuck at home, they're getting frustrated as it is. I think Shaykh mentioned before about, you know, we're on the verge of a recession. Many people have lost their jobs because the government doesn't want to pay the check. So then, you know, in the UK, for example, we have this furlough scheme where the government pays your wages. So soon the companies are going to have to start paying them again. So they're like, okay, we'll just get rid of people. So there's people in uncertainty. A lot of things are happening. At home, there's probably a bit of strife going on. Divorce rates are going up. And then suddenly they see that sort of straw that comes onto the camel's back, and suddenly everything sort of crashes down and they just erupt. And that's partly, and I'm a bit apprehensive about the protest myself, but that for me sometimes it's just that, the ajlatu min ash-shaytan, that people just sort of just exploded and there's an inferno of emotion that suddenly came out. And how do you, but the conditions, and I remember you mentioned this in your book as well, rifq is a condition to call people to goodness. Like, it's not, okay, you agree with us, and if you don't, we're going to burn you out. It's more, you agree with us, you don't, okay, we're going to try and pull you up with us. We're going to try and make you understand, because alasna ikhwan, are we not brothers at the end of the day? But how do you bring that love back into such an emotionally fueled world right now?
Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radhiyallahu anhu, he said that our beloved messenger, Sallallahu Alayhi Wasallam, he said, "Jubilatu qulubin ala hubbin min asna ilayha," that people incline to love whoever does good for them, right? So sometimes I think with a lot of young people, or even some older people, right? I mean, the reality is that Muslims, all of us we're at different spiritual states. Like, everyone is not at the same spiritual state. And we see people that maybe are energetic or do things a certain way. But I think that when elders and people who are more grounded simply approach people with love and compassion and gently wrap their arm around them, even if we can't do it literally right now because of sheltering in place, but if we can, to embrace people and just make them feel like I hear you, I understand your concern, and I care about you, I sincerely care about you, and this is, so I understand what you're saying, but maybe consider this other approach or this other way, right? We know the hadith about the Prophet alayhi salam, when one of the shabab came to him and said, "Oh, Messenger of God, give me permission to make zina," right? What did the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam say? Anta majnoon, ruh. Did he say that? Get it out of my face, you're crazy? No, right? So, that's the rifq that you just talked about, Sidi Awesome. Like, we have to be kind and gentle with people. And if we're kind and gentle with people and do good to them, then their hearts will naturally incline. And this is also another thing too, that, right? There's people who aren't Muslims, and some of these woke people who are embracing our youth, and they're wrapping their arms around them. So, you know what? We care about you. We care about Black lives. So if we're not doing that, and these other people are, then can you blame some of our people in the time of fitan, of mass confusion, that they would go for some of that stuff? No. So I try not to criticize what our youth or a lot of our people are doing right now, even though, like myself, and I've been involved in protests before in the past, I haven't gone out there for any of these protests right now because, and I'm Black, and obviously I care. I know 2 people personally who've been killed by the police who are Black and Muslim, including one imam, right? So I know people personally who've been killed by the police. I care, and it directly affects me. I have an 18-year-old son. I worry about him out, being out and about in the United States of America, right? But I haven't been out in any of these protests, and part of it because I'm worried about, there are people out here with other agendas and doing things that are problematic. Though I believe in the objective that there needs to be different policing in America, and the issue of anti-Black racism is a very real issue. In fact, it's probably America's first sin, we could say, societal sin, of when Africans, many of them were Muslim, were brought over here and treated like animals, and how people were deprived and robbed of their deen and of their culture. People's children sold away and converted them to Christianity. It's a horrible history. But
on that, how bad is the situation?
America has improved, right? America is not the America of my grandfather. Like, my grandfather literally was a sharecropper on a plantation. Basically, he was like a slave, and he's still alive. He's 94 years old. So the America that he grew up in is not the America of today. There's no doubt about that. And anyone who would say that America has not made any changes, I think they're being intellectually dishonest. Right now, in saying that, if I can paint an example for you, that I don't think it's reasonable to expect mangoes to grow from a tree that was born from an apple seed. And there's a particular history and a particular socio-political environment that birthed the United States of America. And there was a certain seed that was planted, which produced certain roots that brought forth a certain tree that has certain branches, right, that have real historical effects on different people, especially the native people of this land and the people who are descendants of enslaved Africans. And it plays itself out statistically in almost every aspect of American life. Do people have onus on working to change their own situations? Yes, of course. Of course. And people always have tried to do this and work to do this. Like, that's been nonstop. But when we talk about the issue of educational disparities and funding of schools, to access to healthcare, who is most likely not to get proper healthcare? Americans use and sell drugs, and basically in the same percentage of their demographics. So why is it that so many more Black men are in prison? And then why are there people who we are finding out who've been on death row or been in prison for a long time who are being exonerated after DA evidence? Or why are certain people convicted of certain crimes, right, when the police certain areas and beat and kill people, and it's not the case for other people, right? So there are systems in place. And what I would say is some of these systems are in overdrive because it goes back to the roots of the very founding of this country. So at the same time, there is such thing as personal accountability. But even let me touch on this Black on Black crime issue. And we're talking about people killing. In American context, it's normally meant that, well, more Black people kill other Black people than the police. The majority of white people in America are killed by white people, but that's never labeled as white on white crime, right? So why is that? Black on Black crime is a phrase that's used to de-emphasize state violence that takes place against Black people. Because when Black people get killed by the police, that's different than when individuals who are civilians kill each other. We're talking about someone who's killing people. It happens all the time. That they're doing it as law enforcement authorities that are sanctioned by the state, right? It's different from someone who's given the sworn the oath and being paid by taxpayer dollars to uphold the law, who is an officer of the state, than individual who's a civilian who's acting upon their own accord. There's a big difference, right? So I think that this would be called qiyas fasida, to try to make this thing to say that black people kill black people or black on black crime, and why and you know, so why not be as upset about that as the police? Because there's a very there's a misunderstanding in the analogy from the very premise. And for anyone who studied Montep knows exactly what I'm talking about when I mention this. This is a false analogy, and I don't subscribe to that. Oh well, black on black crime, but black people who live in black communities are always talking about the need for safer communities, neighborhood patrols, gun buyback campaigns, because America is the most armed country in the world, where many churches and even athletes and people tried to get guns off the streets, right? And black people don't make these guns either, by the way, and they don't own the gun shops. So I'm just putting that out there. Because you asked, so I want to give a very thorough answer behind that.
No, 100%. Oh, do you want to comment that? Because I was
No, go on.
Because at the, you know, because there's definitely this, because I'm literally 20 pages left on Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. So and I could see clearly that there was problems, for example, with the drug war. There's definitely the people have to problematize how the drug war's played out, how the stereotype has been created of the black criminal, aspects of that. But then when she comes to violent crime, she talks about, oh, it's because black people don't get, it's unemployment. That's the major crisis there. And I was like, okay. And then it's like, okay, so is it a capitalism problem? Which Dr. Abdullah is more pro-capitalism. I'm very fundamentally against capitalism as a system. And I was like,
there's capitalism too, because it's exploitive by nature.
Yeah, 100%. So I was like, is that an offshoot of what? Because I was reading about MLK, you know, Martin Luther King, who said in 68, he was like, okay, you've given us schools, you've given us, there's been movement, but fundamentally the poverty that's in black communities is still there. The unemployment that's in black communities is still there. But at the same time, one thing that I really struggled with as a Muslim and as someone who's trying to study the tradition and be a student of knowledge is we do believe that the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasallam, the Quran has made it very clear that any hardship that befalls you is by virtue of the actions that you have committed yourself. This is consistently borne out in the, you know, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس, that evil has only come onto the earth by virtue of the evil that man has committed. So if you are to take this problem down to its most fundamental cause, is it, because I feel like, is it a spiritual crisis? Is it a secular crisis? Is it a crisis of capitalism? Is it everything in one go? Who do you point the finger at in this situation?
Yeah, it's a spiritual crisis in society in general, right? So a group of people can be mazluma, and they've been exploited by a dominant class, right? I mean, and we go back to Fir'aun, right, and what he did to Bani Israel, right? So I like to take a step back. And this is part of the problem, I think, with Muslims and activism, is that we've been so busy as a community following others and trying to build so-called coalitions for social justice. We have neglected dawah. And when I say dawah, I just don't mean having people simply calling them to accept Islam, which we should, but we haven't given people another option between the right and the left. That we haven't given them an option of like what is an Islamic analysis from the Quran, the Sunnah, from our tradition about how to view these societal problems. I think that's very much our fault and where we've been lacking, and we really need to catch up on this, at least in the American context. When we're talking about the issue of poverty, CD, you actually made me think about a hadith. It's a dua attributed to our beloved alayhi salam, where he prayed for refuge of some things, but in a particular order. And the order of this is Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-faqri wal kufr. Now, if you notice, kufr, faqr, poverty comes before kufr. in this. And the explanation of this is that poverty can lead people to acts of kufr. But we have to call the people to a better way, because we have this understanding of Islam and the connection between the metaphysical and the physical. But we can't expect non-Muslims to act upon this paradigm because they don't even know about Islam. They don't even know about this relationship. They're not learning this in their churches, right? They don't get this if they even go to church anymore, because America is becoming a more godless country. Like the majority of people in America now call themselves nuns. Nuns means it means no religion at all. Is a term. They don't even have religion, right? So, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, Karamallahu ta'ala wajhahu wa radiyallahu an, he said, if poverty was a man, I would kill him. We know there's going to be poverty. He said, if poverty was a man, I would kill him, right? So we know that people being in abject poverty, especially when they don't have faith and have this understanding that Allah is ar-Razaq and that we should have sabr and all the things that go along with this framework, you know, that we have a job to educate the people, but we also have an obligation, I believe, to make sure that there aren't certain entities or certain systems that are exploiting people, right? They're exploiting people economically, because the injustice just isn't simply physical. There is such a thing called economic injustice, I believe, right? There is such a thing. And unfortunately, in many major cities in America, the Muslims are involved in this, because you have many Muslims who own liquor stores, who sell drug paraphernalia, they sell alcohol, they sell lottery, and they're in the poorest neighborhoods in America. So instead of giving dawah to Latinos and Black people, then you have Muslims who have autocracy behind their register, where they're selling liquors and they're selling khamr and drug paraphernalia and all these things, right? So we have a part to play, I believe, as Muslims in helping educate people, but also the work to fix these issues, which includes telling people about the evils of riba. Because capitalism in America, in the banking system, thrives off of riba. This is one of the primary reasons that I as a Muslim, I have a problem with the system of capitalism, because it's based upon the system of riba, right? And Allah and His Messenger are at war with riba. So I can't be pro-capitalist in that sense.
Can I just ask then, so going back to something, you know, you've mentioned a number of times now about it is a left issue, it's a secular issue, and then lots of people are getting drawn into this this leftist narrative, this progressive, quote, woke narrative. What we're tending to see now, though, is Muslims are kind of, and I think from my point of view is you know, we had 9/11 in the UK, there was 7/7. There's all of these kind of war on terror, Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., etc. And it was the left that kind of supported that and supported Muslims in that. So obviously, you kind of Muslims would then turn to the left a little bit, because they're like, oh, those guys over there, they agree with us, or you know, they've got our back, so you know, we should be, and then it's taken us down this very, very dangerous road. But then my concern is that there are a lot of Muslims that I see that are kind of using that right, sort of, maybe not all the way sort of right, but a very conservative narrative, and saying actually that, you know, they're much more aligned with us because, you know, at least they have faith, whereas the left don't really have faith, like you mentioned earlier. At least the right have some kind of faith, and at least there's some kind of general understanding, or there's some more common ground, because as a religion we are morally conservative in that sense. But I suppose my concern with that is that there's always this thing of, well, actually, then that was bad, and then we might just end up there, and in a couple of years' time we'll figure out that's bad as well. So do we want to save ourselves from that heartache later on, or, you know, going down the line? But then what is the alternative?
We have to have enough confidence to actually develop our own platform and not be too quick to jump underneath anyone's umbrella, be it the left or the right. And this is an issue of, I believe, having confidence, right? I think that much of how we operate is from a subtle sense of inferiority, right? Because if we are truly, if we see ourselves as kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, right? If we see ourselves as that, then we shouldn't be quick to follow others and to get underneath their umbrellas. There are strategic times that we can work in coalition with people on the left or on the right, but it depends on our objectives. So we have to be very clear upon our objectives and what aligns, and then I think we would see that neither side, we should be fully throwing our hat or fully throwing our kufi on either side, right? Neither one of them are awliya, and we shouldn't look at them that way. Right? So neither side is on iman and how we define iman, right? And both sides have their problems, and we have a basis in the Quran of how we cooperate with each other as Muslims, and it's a mabda of how we deal with non-Muslims. Ta'awunu al-birri wa taqwa wa la ta'awunu al-ithmi wa udwan. Right? Surah Al-Ma'idah. Right? That's the foundation. We cooperate with people and one another, but based upon al-birr and al-taqwa, righteousness and that which respects the remembrance of God, right? And al-birr, the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam, he said, "Inna sidqa yahdi ila al-birr wa inna birra yahdi ila al-jannah." Right? So the foundation of all noble traits of character starts off with, it has to be true. It's sidq, it's truthfulness, right? Is that which is true, is correct, right? Is that which is pure, what leads towards purity, because the truth is pure, right? And then that is what leads to the paradise. So I really think that we have to evaluate. There's some positions on the right that I agree with in the American context 100%, right? But I also know that there are many people who are on the right who are overtly very racist and xenophobic, including my president. Right? And there's no getting around that. Like, I'm not going to say because the left is so bad, I'm going to start saying, I need to like openly like support Trump. And at the same time, some of these people who are talking about diversity and inclusion on the left, they are trying to undermine Muslims and change our morality from within. So their diversity is inclusion, or so-called pluralism, is, yeah, we accept pluralistic thoughts, except what disagrees with us. So if you agree, so one group has animosity towards Muslims as a type of like non-white, non-Christian entity. That's the right. The left, they claim to embrace Muslims, but really they have a loathing and an animosity towards Islamic morality itself. They actually have loathing for the actual Sharia, right? So that's why I say we shouldn't be too quick to jump on either side, because neither side is our awliya, right? And I can't say that enough. And I'm not willing to throw my lot in with the right just because of people on the left having some problematic views. Both sides are problematic.
Can I comment that? So you spoke about, I don't know if you read it recently, Shaykh Hamza Wal-Maqbool wrote a piece about some of the problematic aspects of, so I think he's come up pro-protest, but he had some problems with BLM specifically.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I wrote it before I read it before he put it out.
Okay, Hamza, he's a friend of mine as well. I studied with him. He's a very incredible man. May Allah preserve him. But then he lays out the alternative. And his alternative in that piece, he goes, is the turuq. It's the tariqah of tasawwuf that's going to come. And I was looking at this recently. There is a history of black Sufi activism or Sufism in America already. There have been turuq, but right now people, they have a misunderstanding of tasawwuf. They find it's been tainted by many people who've misappropriated it, abused the positions. Right now, we will mention no names, but especially in America and the UK, maybe we're just better hiding our problems, really. America is too brazen, and it just shows everybody what's going wrong with it. But we have problems here too. There's tasawwuf now, and then there's people being pushed to different. But I firmly believe if there's a spiritual crisis, then the Sufi path is the cure. And it has always been the cure from the time of the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ, all the way till the ages. The Sufis have always held the mantle down in every position. But is there possibility for a Sufi revival as such? Can the Sufis now step up and take control, or is it gone too far?
Well, I mentioned some of the issues about tariqa gangbanging, right? So I think that has to be sorted out, at least within the American context. But there's no doubt about it that when we're talking about these societal issues, that there is no fixing it without tasawwuf. There is no, and actually, what Shaykh Hamza Maqbool wrote, Hafidhahullah, if one were to read the works of Dr. Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson, and he wrote a book called Islam and the Black American Looking Towards a Third Resurrection. He wrote this book maybe over 15 years ago. He mentioned in the very conclusion that he advocated for tariqah. And the same thing in his book of Islam and the Suffering of Black America, Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering. He mentioned this same thing at the very conclusion, which then he followed up. He wrote a book called Sufism for Non-Sufis, which was nothing but an introduction with a translation of Taj al-Urus by Ibn Ata'Allah Iskandari is what it is, right? He mentioned something like this similarly, right? So Dr. Jackson also said, we can't fiqh our way out of all of our problems. Not fix. We can't fiqh our way out of all of our problems, right? So we have issues, and the means of spiritual purification and tahalli, right, of emptying out those negative character traits so that we can fill them with beauty, spiritual beauty, is the way. I would say, though, very specifically that when we talk about fixing the broader society, and I've said this recently, that at least in the American context, we have a very racially stratified and divided Muslim community in America. And we have to fix our own house on this. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentions this to the people of the book. Right? Do you encourage other people to be righteous and you want them to be just, but you don't do it yourselves? Yet you recite the book. Don't you have any intelligence? So it's like, my good friend Dr. Bilal Ware, Hafidhahullah, he always talks about this, that broken people can't fix the world. Like, we're talking about trying islah and trying to change the world. And that's why in many of my talks relating to George Floyd and all these street protests, I've been pointing Muslims more towards, we need to be involved in our own introspection and spiritual purification and focusing on that and trying to get our own house in order, because Islam is like clean water. And if we're talking about wanting to give Islam to the people, then we have to give this clean water to them in a clean glass. Like, we don't want to be presenting Islam to people with a dirty glass and they drink the water and it makes them sick, right? So in what Sheikh Hamza says, I believe that there is no way out of fixing these issues without the complete Islam being implemented and taught by the Muslims, which is Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, right? And it's not just aqidah, it's not just fiqh, it's also the tazkiyah or the tasawwuf.
Thinking about, yeah, I was going to say, just thinking about, I suppose one of the other things we really wanted to talk about was the Futuwwa, and then part of that, you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier was that if we are not putting our arms around shoulders and supporting people and, you know, giving them the love, and especially for young males, and, you know, in the context that we're talking about here as well, and then you've got the added thing about the confusion, this inferiority complex that there is out as well. There will be someone else who puts their arms around these people, and I think in our communities, especially in the UK, a lot of the people some of the people that are putting their arms around these young people are involved in drugs, and then that becomes a massive problem.
Muslim drug dealers, right?
Muslim drug dealers. Yeah.
We have them here too. We have Muslim drug dealers here too.
So it then, and then it leads to this. You know, one of the things we really wanted to talk about was this crisis that there is amongst young males. And then I think Molana mentioned to me the other day that he was reading a couple of articles about a sort of millennial men, millennial boys, massive issues around suicide, massive issues around depression, mental health, those kind of things. And then that then just becomes, you know, it just carries on. It's just you know, this never-ending circle that just continues, and then affects our communities constantly. Could you talk about some of the things that you're doing around that? I mean, again, I don't know what the situation is at the moment where you are with regards to the lockdown. Are you still in lockdown? Is it kind of eased a little bit, or?
It's just start loosening up. So we just started praying about 6 days ago in Jama'ah in our masajid, and this was the first Friday for Khutbah al-Jama'ah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I know one of the things you had a program where you had lots of young males coming in, and you would do this whole thing around Futuwwa and discussions.
Yeah, that unfortunately was suspended because of the lockdown. Though we continue to have our Futuwwa classes going through Kitab Futuwwa by As-Sulami, Rahmatullahi alayhi. We continue those over Zoom, but the actual one-on-one interaction, as well as the martial arts classes, that's been suspended. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we're going to be starting those back up very soon.
Sure.
Where it's a series of gatherings 3 days a week. But what I want to say is that there's really been spiritual warfare, especially in the West, against our males. And it's very, there's a movement to emasculate men. And if I can just highlight something that we see in the Quran, is mentioned more than one time, that the scheme of Fir'aun was to kill the males but to spare the women, right? Or, you know, slaughter the men, as it's used in its form in Arabic, right? So there's a Fir'aunic type of thing that's been going on of trying to give women a different perception of traditional femininity, and at the same time to emasculate males so that they don't become men. So you have a lot of dhakur biologically, but not a lot of rijal in the truest sense, right? And this is one of the signs of the last days, right? That there will become a time when the rijal will leave, and nisa, the women, will remain, to the degree that there will be 50 imra'a, there will be 50 women for every qaymun wahid. Now this is very interesting in this hadith, because the hadith doesn't say that it doesn't say that there will be 50 males. It doesn't say there will be 50 women for every one male. It's 50 women for every one real stand-up man. So there'll be a lot of males, but not a lot of men. right? So this is a subtlety that we have to look at in this hadith. Now,
could you sorry, Sheikh, could you
maybe explain?
Clarify what you mean by man? I mean, obviously, male, I think. Well,
not
again,
just okay, not just someone who's mukallaf, who's reached the age of past puberty, or has a beard, or has a deep voice, or has XY chromosomes DNA. I'm talking about a man who stands up in their manhood, who, number one, knows their place as being a man, as a divine construct that has been imbued in what manhood's supposed to be by Allah and His Messenger, Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam. Number one, and that a man stands up and becomes responsible for that which a man should be. And there are certain characteristics that relate to being a real man, right? So, for instance, el-bukhl, or stinginess, is not a characteristic of a man, or being self-centered. That's not a characteristic. If a man is to be qayyum, right, and if he's supposed to stand up and take responsibility, then the characteristic of as-sajaa, courage, and also ithar, these are qualities of real stand-up men.
Would you translate?
Right? I mean, courage, moral courage, and also ithar, altruism, that they prefer others over themselves, right? So when we look at this path of Futuwwa, and we look at the youth, the young fatah that grows up to be a mature man, then we see that, for example, in this matter, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, right, who was of the Fityan, who rose up to be this mature man in the fullest sense, and there's no mistake why all the spiritual orders in the Tariq trace their way back to Sayyidina Ali, even amongst one of the chains of the Naqshbandiyya, right? They all go ahead. Awesome.
Oh, sorry, because I have given bay'at to Naqshbandi Mujaddidi, so I was just going to cover it and say Sayyidina Abu Bakr Zindabad, but you corrected. You made your point.
Yeah, and one of the chains. But even in this one chain, Sayyiduna Jafar as-Sadiq even traces back even to one of the things back to Abu Bakr Siddiq, right? Even in the Naqshbandiyya. But there's a connection back to Ali ibn Abi Talib in this way, but there's certain aspects that we see in the incompleteness of a young male growing up to be a chivalrous young man. And there are certain attributes that we can see. And Sidi Abdul Aziz Adabag mentioned this in his book El-Ibriz, when he points to Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib as the one who exemplifies this chivalry and this shaja'a, right? That the Khulafa had different khasla that they're known for. Abu Bakr primarily, he embodies a certain khasla, and Umar embodies a certain khasla, right? And so this is why I mentioned this issue about Sayyidina Ali.
This idea of because what you spoke about there's been a massive recognition of, I don't know, Asim was a bit uncomfortable with the terminology, but I think the crisis of masculinity is one of the best ways to describe it. Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad's been speaking about it specifically as a Muslim issue. Shaykh Ibrahim, OCF, has done a lot of work in the UK trying to do things about it. And it's been, the crazy thing is it's been recognized by the seculars themselves. The non-Muslims have come and they've had a recognition. And that's why we saw it's died down a lot now, but we saw this massive rise of, you could say, the dark web, the sort of Jordan Peterson, who came out, told people clean your rooms, and everybody went on like he just dropped the greatest wisdom of all time. But but that people had that lack of meaning, that they were looking for something, and he suddenly gave them that little spark that suddenly made sense to them, that maybe aligned to their fitrah. And I really wanted to talk about this, the murabbi, the importance of the murabbi, because what's crazy about Jordan Peterson is, I don't know if people know this, he developed an opioid, he developed a painkiller addiction, and he's in hospital now. And it was the idea that he was their murabbi, and then he fell short himself. Into the crisis that he was warning others of himself, he fell into it himself. And we pray that Allah Jalla wa Ala cures him and brings him to Islam if there is goodness, And But the thing is, this idea that we've seen of one of the big problems we have is how the crisis of masculinity, I'm sorry I'm going on a bit here, but the crisis of masculinity sort of perpetuates itself. That the absent father causes the absent father, who causes the other absent father, and it sort of replays again and again and again and again. How do you bring in that stopgap where you stop that cycle perpetuating itself?
Well, this is part of what we've done with our Futuwwa program here, because a number of these young men, some of them, their fathers aren't around, but many of them are converts to Islam or reverts, whatever term so they don't have that sense of like manliness that's also that is infused with spirituality, right? So this is where people have to have a guide, or people present themselves in America from the secular perspective, because having a big brother, right? And there's like big brothers of America, but we want to do this as far as having they're trying to cultivate this relationship of people having spiritual mentors or spiritual mentorship, right? And you mentioned the word murabbi, which is very important. And I will just mention 2 points about this very quickly, if I can. That for those who question the importance of having a murabbi or a murshid who are watching this right now, that maybe you're not sold on it, or some people say, oh, this is Shaykh worship or whatever.
Do you want to define murabbi maybe?
Yeah. So Morabi is read to the word tarbiyah, right? So the one who helps and raise you up and rearing you up into that which you should be as a mature, spiritually grounded Muslim, right? In the full sense of the word. Or some would call this Shaykh at tarbiyah, right? This Morabi, that one of Ulul Azm al-Rusul, Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he's one of the greatest messengers, steadfast. Well, if we were to just take a cursory reading of Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Quran, and that interaction with Al-Khidr alayhi salam, we would see that clearly one of God's prophets, he had a spiritual guide, right? So I say to people that if one of the greatest men that ever walked this earth had a spiritual mentor and had a guide, then who do we think we are? We're not ma'soom, right? Musa alayhi salam was guarded from the intention of disobeying Allah, right? That's not us, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, and that with some of its historical inaccuracies in some scenes that I personally don't care for, I believe that there's some benefit in at least the first 3 seasons of the TV show Ertugrul, right? Because you see this whole thing about murabbi and mentorship and looking up to a grounded, positive male role model. So Ertugrul is the main character, and he's the father historically of Uthman, who Adalto Uthmaniya, the Ottoman Empire, was started from Uthman. So Ertugrul was his father. So this is a series basically talking about what was the asbab, or the occasions that led to the Ottoman Empire coming up, and it shows the Ayyubids and the Seljuks and all of these things that were going on. Ertugrul had his father Suleiman Shah. If you notice that also with Suleiman Shah, and Suleiman Shah died, who was that model for him, but who also came into the picture in the first series? Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi became the Murabbi, became the Sheikh of Ertugrul. Then who also came into the scene, because that was his Murshid, but Ibn Arabi would travel out. But then who became his Muqaddam? It was the grandson of Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, right? So all of this is infused and shown, right? So you have the spiritual guide, the mentor, and then also on the ground, who is close by to give care and to give nasiha, was the representative of that guide, right? So this is practical tasawwuf of being shown as far as relationship in a TV series. And this is why I said this is good. And even some of our brothers who are watching it who don't understand the dynamics, it actually is introducing them to something that's part of tariqah, right? So
the murabbi, and you know, like sometimes, like you spoke about the TV show, one of the big problems we have, I mean, just to go, if you just went into the problems that the modern masculine, beyond, because some of it's, you spoke about emasculation, so there's this, you know, like, oh, you know, it's not bad if men cry, and Allah alam, there is scope. We cry in front of our Lord and we cry at certain positions, and that is found in our tradition within the Sahaba. But you know, this idea of not all men want to play game, do sports, and there's that. But some of it is societal problems that are very sort of, how would you put this? There's a loss of nature and there's a loss of direction that is not just an emasculating problem. It's not just about men being pushed to be women, but it's also the idea that they don't have meaning. They're not finding the employment that they would normally find. They're not getting married. They're not finding spouses. They're not doing well at school. The video game addiction thing. And you spoke about Atul being a mechanism that we can use in order to bring back. And then there's like the Sayyidina Umar TV show that tells the life of the Sahaba, and people recommended that as well. Is there, this is something I really wanted to ask about, because I read this paper on Futuwwa, guilds. So they used to have guilds of Futuwwa, guilds of chivalrous young men all over the Muslim lands. And there's one famous one called the Ikhwan, who would have branches all over the Muslim world. And if you got lost somewhere, or if you got stuck and you needed help, you'd go to the Ikhwan branch, which is not the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood, but it's the Ikhwan of that spiritual path. And those people would come and help you. And there'd be something. Is there, and you said we should, I heard, remember when we did a pre-conversation, you said we need to make Futuwwa global. We need to make it all over the world. Do you think that what do we do? Can we start the guilds again? What are the mechanisms that we can do in our communities to give people Futuwwa?
Well, yes, we could start guilds, but what I'd say is that when the travel ban lifts, if you want to see this, because it never stopped in some parts of the Muslim world, I would say go to Senegal. And if you go to places like Touba, which is the city that was founded by Shaykh Ahmadou Bamba, radiallahu anhu, who's the founder of a Tariqatul Muradiyya that's in Senegal. It may be not the first tariqa, definitely the second most. And most people in Senegal have a tariqa affiliation, by the way, in that Muslim country. I think it's the most tasawwuf practiced country, or at least adhered to, as far as people and their leanings in the Muslim world. You'll see that they have something there where they actually have initiation there. So like Sheikh Muhammad Mendez has talked about this, Dr. Ware's talked about this, where there are certain steps of initiation that take place. The Quran school, and actually writing on the lah and writing on the wood board as part of the initiation, and writing in the and what age to start at, and even writing with a particular type of natural ink, and even how they lick their Quran lessons every day off the board. I know some people might say this sounds shirky, but literally to embody the Quran totally, like not only in writing it and listening it and reciting, even like tasting the ink that you wrote it with when you clean your board, right? Like the issues of like, also that at time when they start martial arts training and actually connect someone with their teacher, and then you actually live for a period of time with your actual trainer, with your teacher, and then at the time of like certain poems that are memorized and recited in Arabic, in which they know the meanings, that talk about these like certain like virtues of what it means to be chivalrous. Like that's uninterrupted in some places in West Africa. It never stopped, right? So that might be somewhere to actually go for a fact-finding trip. And I have the connections there. We were planning on going in the spring, but Allah knows best. COVID-19 stopped that. But there are places of this tradition where and when you're talking about specifically using the word guilds, where this never stopped.
So what's your program? So you have Abdul Karim Yahya, yourself. I think is there someone else as well?
Yeah, and also Shaykh Kifani Sise,
Okay.
who was he studied underneath the late El Marhum Shaykh Hassan Sise at Tijani in Senegal. Yeah, we've had the program going on there where there's a particular age group that we bring people in, right? So it's starting off with the young man that comes into the age of about like 14 years old, right? And then we bring them in and then we talk to them. We go through the kitab. We also talk about some very real things about what it means to be a man, about being responsible. We talk about relationships and how relationships should be between young men and women. And because if we don't talk to them about some of these things, including sexuality and things like that, where they're going to hear it from rappers, they're going to hear it from the Muslim drug dealer, they're going to get it. So they need to hear it from us in the right way, in a healthy way. We also have the martial arts, but we also have times of having young men specifically assigned to do khidmah for their elders. So, for instance, it snows here a lot, so we would send young people and have them go to shovel the sidewalks and the driveways of people in the community of the neighborhood. There's been food drop-offs. Now there's been curbside pickups, right, where people who come in the community and poor people come by, and then the Muslim youth are there with the food boxes and the grocery bags to do some sort of khidmah, as well as even sometimes when we go places to speak, that the youth will some of the young brothers will accompany us as we go places, and we have them even do something like security, right? Because we also have them, we have programs, we have security at all their programs, right? And we base this not simply because we're in a non-Muslim a non-Muslim land, and there are crime issues, but also to remind them of the Sunnah and even the wisdom behind Salatul Khawf, right? But like when there's a group of you praying, there's another group that's on post that watches the backs of the other people, right? So we even went around and were training people about this and reminding people about this in Masajid after the New Zealand masjid attack, right? You just don't leave the Muslims unguarded in the time of the khutbah, right? That there has to be people on post, and so we've been about the security training as well. This is all part of the and inshallah, we're looking for ways to expand, to improve. So I'm not saying this is the model, but it's like it's like a Futuwwa for the American environment, because we have to understand the urf and the adat of the land that we live in and the circumstances. Like perhaps how this tradition was transmitted historically in Istanbul or Damascus. There has to be some upgrading or some tweaking on some of it so it can fit into Detroit, Michigan, or Manchester or Liverpool over on your side of the pond, right? Like there has to be some tweaking because the environment isn't exactly the same.
So one of the things that, I mean, we've been, as I say, this is something that we've been working on for a number of years now, actually. So we've got, we have youth clubs. So Ali Ibn Miller actually came down to one of our youth club sessions when he was in the UK.
He moved here in Detroit now, so he's part of Dawud now. He moved here.
Yeah. So he mentioned that when he was here, actually. So, but this is it. So again, it's just, so we have that. I think he came and it was incredible actually watching him. So he did this whole thing. It's online somewhere. But he did this whole thing about the 313, the Battle of Badr, and he was literally wrestling these kids. Which I mean, that's again is something that you really wouldn't expect. But on the back of that, we were able to say to the young people, okay, you know, you got it handed to you, basically. But then you can come along to our jiu-jitsu sessions that we run on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, and that has increased. Well, again, before the lockdown and all that kind of situation, it did increase the number of young people that were young boys that were coming down. But so you don't really have like a curriculum as such. It's just it is going through the book and then going through these points that you feel are really important.
Yeah, there's not a curriculum that's been established as of yet that is in book form, though it is being developed. And my next project is actually writing a book on this topic. So that is something that's ongoing, and we hope that can be out by 2021 with Allah's permission and with your dua. Please pray for us to put this out, inshallah.
I saw Shaykh Tamim Ahmadi did some work recently. He did a Futuwwa course, and then I had an idea of trying to take the book of Imam Sulami, because I read this. I don't know if you've Philip Zimbardo. He's a Stanford professor of psychology, and he's done a lot of work on the crisis of masculinity again, and sort of trying to bring, because we read the book of Futuwwa of Imam Sulami, and if you're not used to how traditional texts work, and if you just gave that to a young guy and said, okay, this is how you become a man, okay, I'm off now, you would just sit there and be like, what have you done? What am I meant to do with this? It makes no sense. How do you take that? Do we need new text? Do we need to rewrite the Kitab al-Futuwwa, updated for modern? Because I remember me and Asim were talking about, you mentioned the tweaking that has to take place, because like the basketball court in the masjid that some people might be uncomfortable with, but there's that tweaking that has to take place. How do you make Abdurrahman al-Sulami, rahimahullah ta'ala, appealing to just a young man in a Western country?
So it is right. The sort of these texts and going through the need and reading like a traditional text may not make sense to a lot of people, especially if they haven't been traditional learning. And so what we've done is in these classes is that we've talked about it, and then we give contemporary examples and put it into like a framework. So the key would be then to write the book using the basic foundational text, but framing the topics or the chapters in a particular way, which then gives contemporary examples or application that relates to issues in their societies, in which they can connect these lessons to something that is going on in contemporarily in society, right? So that's the way that we've approached at least talking about it, and I think this is a framework of how to write about it in a book. Because see, in Sulami rahmatullahi alayhi, it wasn't his conception that it would become a time when he wrote that book that people would say, I have no gender, or gender fluidity, or a guy could say he wakes up today and he's a guy. Tomorrow he says he feels like a girl, and then the following day he says he's nothing. He's an it. He's neither a male or a female. That wasn't in a Sulami's conception, right? So
it wasn't in our conception 5 years ago.
I mean, literally, I remember saying this to my murabi, Sheikh Ali Suleiman Ali. I said to him about 5 years ago, I said, subhanAllah, I said, if the Qawm Lut saw these people today, they probably would say Ajib. Because these people have gone a step beyond Qawm Lut. They're doing things that Qawm Lut didn't do. They're like, subhanAllah, like really, like, and I'm not even exaggerating about this. When we read the Qawm Lut and what they were doing, look at these people today. They were at least definitive and say, I'm a man who wants another man. I mean, they were definitive on that, right? I mean, so this is like a new wave of just like straight, like total confusion and chaos, right? So,
I mean, the scary thing for me is, and you look at this confusion and chaos now, where will we be in another decade? You know, what are the kind of challenges that, and again, for me as a parent now of a how old is he, 8, and a 3-year-old daughter, you just think, oh my God, like what are the challenges going to be when they're teenagers? And what can we do now to make that ground, like, you know, we need to make that ground solid now, to ensure that they have some kind of grounding before, you know, when those conversations, you know, inevitably do occur.
No, 100%.
Well, there is the ideals, the idea of guilds, and I would even say the idea of even setting up or helping establish more boarding school opportunities where Muslim youth can have scholarships, and for those parents who want to get their boys out of some of these toxic environments. But I think this goes back to a deeper issue of, at least in America, we failed, and I've talked about this with some of my teachers, but we have a dire need of establishing awqaf in America to support these institutions, because just doing the Masajid fundraiser, or now it's going to do online or launch good. And if we think that we're going to establish and have some sort of situation where we can have real institutions that can continue this work, we can't keep doing things the way that we do with like crisis fundraising, right? To meet these budgets, we have to establish awqaf if we're going to be serious about this, you know. And I was discussing this with a friend of mine that just recently, that at the Masjid of Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anh in Baghdad, they have serviced people and fed people there every day, perpetually, going back centuries, from an endowment that was set up at his time and by his children that maintained it, right? So when we're talking about khair and extending things that have institutions, right? Like, we look at these like that particular waqf that was set up, right? We need these type of awqaf that are set up to help support these types of institutions that are going to help in the infusement, in the embodiment of this Futuwwa and this positive masculinity, right? This is my belief, but I think that this takes like planning and some sort of vision.
Inshallah. I was going to say, so again, I'm just aware of the time, but I did want to say that the Karima Foundation have, so we do have regular jiu-jitsu gatherings. Well, obviously before the lockdown, inshallah, we've now made plans to, we've put measures in place to try to start up again soon. We've got men's sessions, we've got children, we've got like over 60 children that are part of the program. We also have sisters sessions as well, so sisters only jiu-jitsu sessions. And we include archery in the martial arts as well that we deliver. But on top of that, actually, one of the things that I think, we think is incredibly important, I mean, again, Detroit, I'd imagine, in a city, lots of challenges of actually trying to get out and seeing nature. So, you know, we've delivered sort of excursions, I suppose, day trips, weekend trips to, you know, the mountains, to Wales and places like that as well, and where it's just men only. And we've had a couple of interesting trips. So, and again, we have the scouts groups as well. So inshallah, those are the kind of programs that we are delivering. And you know, one of the things you mentioned as well about proper planning, we will hopefully, by the time this video goes out, by the time this podcast goes out, we will have launched our program to try and safeguard some of the future of these types of programs, and we will be asking for donations. So if it has gone out, it'll be down below in the links. So we'll be hoping for people to sign up. But definitely we would like to actually be involved in that conversation. I think Shaykh would be really, really interesting. Really, inshallah, we do make dua that the book comes out and that is accessible for all of us. And then it's something that's incredibly important. We encourage you know, all communities across the country and across the globe really to be involved in that kind of process. If there's nothing else from yourself, Maulana, any other questions?
I just wanted to See, I was so interested about the Black history stuff, and I don't think we're going to have time to go there. But inshallah, maybe we'll have you on again at some point, and we can do a focus on Muslim Black history. I really, one of the things that struck me, and I really struggled with this, to be honest, was I read the article. There's an Atlantic article that came out yesterday, I think, and it's called The Millennial Mental Health Problem. And I read it, and it was talking about we've got COVID, the recession is impending, people have lost their jobs. In a modern capitalist society, jobs give people's life meaning. Now that that meaning is being stripped away from them by virtue of the economic situation we're in, people are now people can't get married because they don't have the financial capacity. People can't buy houses because they don't have the financial capacity. All secular capitalism defines meaning in your life and then strips that meaning away itself. And it's a very scary situation we're in. And people are committing suicide. Suicide rates among millennials have gone up. Suicide rates among Generation Z, the social media age, and there's a lot of stuff that's all compounding together to bombard the modern man and really make his life unbearable. And I remember I put this on a group, and the brother who's probably going to watch this, he said, oh, this has always been happening. People need to just grow up a bit. There's nothing new.
Soft.
Pardon?
Boys are soft.
That's it. Men are just too soft, and you guys. And I'm a millennial, so I took it to heart a bit, and I was like, oh, yeah. But I remember I read a hadith, and I really want you to. There's a hadith of Sayyidina Abu Darda radiallahu anhu who was walking in the streets of Damascus, and he sees there's a guy sat on the floor, and there's a bunch of people beating him up, and he goes up to them and says, "What are you guys doing?" And then they say, "Aznaba dhanban kabira," and he committed a major fault. He fell short. He didn't stand up when the moment came. He's too soft, whatever. And then Sayyidina Abu Darda radiallahu anhu said, "He's your brother, and if he had fallen into a well, would you not have pulled him out?" And I found that very powerful. So I was just hoping, Shaykh, how do people see young men failing? People see young men not doing well at school. People see young women struggling. People see humans falling short. People see, for example, in your communities in America, the Black community, they see people committing crimes, people doing certain things, and then they have this idea that we need to leave them to their devices. They've made their bed, let them lie in it. But how important is it in our tradition to be people who lift other people up, who don't let people fall away and lose them? And I'd love if you could just finish off on that, inshallah.
Yeah, the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam never canceled whole groups of people, and in this cancel culture. And though this isn't canceling, but sometimes we can be too hard and say, oh, this entire group of people are doomed. And we know what the Prophet even said about that, Sallallahu Alayhi Wasallam, right? That if we were to say that a whole group of people are doomed, then the person who says it, they themselves are in trouble, right? Like, so we shouldn't take that attitude. But I think that one of the issues that we have is sometimes we glorify Islamic history, but not understanding the type of care and uplifting that the Prophet alayhi salam had to do with the Sahaba. Like the Sahaba, many of them came from some very challenging backgrounds, right? Many of them were involved in some things that we would look at and we would like suck our teeth at, right? He was very patient with his companions, and he brought them up by degrees, right? But again, it goes back to a point that I mentioned, that we have to approach people with kindness and love and wrap our arm, or as the Majazi language of the Quran uses, wrapping our wing around people, right? And he was bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim, right? He was always kind and compassionate with people. So we have to show people another way and do it. Yeah, we point out the faults or the flaws of certain things, and that's fine and good. But in the Quranic paradigm, is to show people the right way, firstly, and then you point out that which is wrong. That's the Quranic paradigm, right? And if you look at it, you'll notice that the Quran uses the framework of enjoying the good first before mentioning forbidding the evil, right? وَتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وأولئك هم المفلحون كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. Like this is the Quranic paradigm, right? Or what I mentioned before, تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان. So the Quranic paradigm, and this is the way of Rasulullah Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam, is that you go and you try to show the people the right way, and you embody the right way. And then you also in the process say, okay, this is the way you do it. This is the right way. And then say conversely, this is the way you don't do it. But we just can't say, oh, you're lost, you're doomed. All this stuff is wrong, right? There has to be a way of gently bringing our young people along. And my teachers did this to me, right? And I still have work to do. And I'm in my 40s, right? But I remember one of my teachers 20-something years ago, he looked at me and I was like real fired up, you know, because when you're from the Shabab, you can, I mean, we know what the Prophet said about that, alayhi salam, that the Shabab are actually from a branch of El Janoon, from insanity, right? He put his hand on me and looked at me and he said, you know, he said, Dawud, remember, he said, you could be sincere and be sincerely wrong. Right? Just like, you know, he's trying to calm me down, right? And then he showed me another way about something, but like, you know, you could be sincere and be sincerely wrong. You know, like it's like, don't universalize your own experiences as being the absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So my teacher taught me this, rahmatullah alayhi. May Allah grant him a gentle fidel sa'ala. He taught me so many practical lessons. This one teacher of mine. So that's the thing. We just have to be like very kind and compassionate and try to bring people along. But tongue lashing in and of itself is not going to solve the problem or the issue or bring people along. And that's my opinion. And Allah knows best.
I mean, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Shaykh Dawud Walid. I think I could, well, personally, I could probably sit here for another couple of hours, but we've already taken up enough of your time. So thank you so much for giving up your time for us, and inshallah it will be of benefit for us and our communities, and hopefully lots of other people. We look forward to hearing from you soon as well. And could you tell us about maybe how people can sort of find out? You're on Twitter, and I don't know if you're on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook.
I have a public Facebook page. I post you know, some of the talks that I give, and also to follow Towards Sacred Activism on Facebook. And when things lighten up, actually, I came and gave a couple of talks about sacred activism in the UK.
Cambridge.
I was there last year. I was in
Is it Cambridge?
this year. I was in London, and then I went to Cambridge, and I gave the Cambridge Islamic University that was there, Cambridge Islamic College, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I spoke at a program with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad there as well at the university. I hope if things loosen up that there's some way I can get back to the UK later on this year, I hope. And I'd love to come and visit you, brothers, if I end up making it to the UK, and we can sit and talk and, you know, have some coffee and just be brothers. Alhamdulillah.
Definitely. Give us a shout if inshallah.
I love just having the sohbah with the brothers. It didn't have to even be for a program. We just sit with the brothers and drink some tea or coffee and just, you know, exchange ideas. Alhamdulillah. So may Allah facilitate what's best for all of us.
Ameen. Ameen. Jazakallah khair again. So again, just a reminder for everybody, please do like, subscribe, share. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and then we will inshallah try to get back to you if there is anything. Any final words of advice, Shaykh Dawud?
Stick to your teachers.
Ameen.
Stick to your teachers.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.